Scilla, thank you so much for joining us today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Having recently been made aware of your work, and to be honest, in total awe of your body of work,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm very grateful for you to join us on the What is a Good Life podcast today.
I'm delighted to be with you, and I love the kind of questions you're asking. So we'll do our best together.
So we jump straight in with the question of, is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
Well, the big question, I suppose it's followed me most of my life since my late 20s is who am I? Because I believe it's essential for us humans to look particularly into the heart and say, what am I doing here? What is what is my business on earth, if you like? But to learn somehow painfully, sometimes not painfully, who it is we really are and what we're up to. This is a question my parents always used to ask, what are you up to? So it's not necessarily a cheeky inquiry, but it's to try to delve deeper into the raison d'être, the reason why we're put on this earth with this family, with these advantages or disadvantages that we may feel we have. But I love to take that inquiry deeper as I get older. And it changes enormously as I get older. But that's a long enough answer to your first question.
Can you talk to me about the significance of addressing this question through the heart?
Oh, because the heart doesn't lie. It's it's probably the only one of our faculties that really doesn't lie. Our imagination, our vision, our sense of other people's feelings can often be fallible and inaccurate. But when we turn to the heart and really listen to the heart, really listen to the heart, it never, ever tries to elude us or befuddle us or pat us up or anything like that. The heart is truth. It's essentially truth. And sometimes it does take a while to calm down the furious issues that are boiling around in our brains and really listen to the heart. But every time that I have had a very big question in my life and taken the time to meditate and put my real attention on my heart, it tells me the most wonderful truth. And it's not necessarily a painful truth. It may be slightly difficult to absorb, but it's never, ever unkind. The heart cannot be unkind. So it's taken me a while, actually, to learn to trust the effort it takes to really listen to my heart and to take the time to really listen to my heart. But it is invaluable. And if I'm honest, I think I have to let you know that I've only been able to do that or begin to do that since in my 50s or 60s. And now it's my guide. And I wish I'd learned to do it sooner.
As you were speaking there, I just felt a softening around my own heart and almost the truth of what you were saying. Really curious to hear maybe an example of when you began to take this as your guide.
Hmm. Well, what it's resulted in now is that 3 years ago, I started a program called The Mighty Heart because I was so convinced by that time that um, having dealt with conflicts of one kind or another for most of my life, that the heart was really fundamental to bringing about peaceful outcomes. But to answer your question, it does go back a long time. And I really wish I'd learned it earlier, to take the internal time to reach my heart and to develop the quietness that the heart needs in order to be heard. There's all kind of noise going on in our minds, as you know, and all kinds of distractions. So we do have to set aside time. I've found I do have to set aside time to to really identify with the rhythms of my heart and to be quiet enough to hear what it has to say. And the reason I stress this, and I hope it doesn't only happen when people get to be as old as I am, because if I'd known this when I was 20, I would have done much deeper work in trying to help people in different conflict situations. I think I did good work. I don't think I did much harm, but I do believe that those of us in this kind of work who can call on our heart, not our mind, which wants to be clever and give advice and sort people out and all that kind of thing. The heart is just truth telling. You don't always want to hear its truth, but it is truth.
You used a beautiful expression there that I hadn't quite considered myself in the sense of listening to my heart, but just the rhythm of your heart. Can you talk to me a little bit about the significance of that?
Well, my husband is an acupuncturist and has come through many different careers in his life as a university professor and all sorts of things to arrive at being an acupuncturist. And now he's one of the top ones in the country. And he says that and he taught me this, that the rhythm of the heart is almost indispensable in making decisions or even taking steps. I find if I'm climbing a mountain or climbing down a mountain, which is, as you know, often more difficult, if I'm scattered, distracted by the horizon and the beauty, and if I'm not in tune with the rhythm of my heart, my steps will falter or slip or might even be in danger. So the rhythm of my heart is vital in that sense. But also, as you and every one of us will know, when the heart speeds up, it's doing that for a reason. It's doing that because we are not in that moment calm and available. I use the word available advisedly because we need the rhythm of the heart to tell us, are we here? Are we present? And if I put my hand on my heart, which I do a lot now, I know just from the beat of my heart, am I present? Am I present? And if I'm not, it only takes a few breaths to get present if you're working with your heart. Is this all too esoteric?
No, oh, no, this is right up my street.
So just putting my hand on my heart as I'm doing now, it's very much enjoying this conversation, I have to tell you. But it's just got all sorts of information for me, and everybody's heart will give them different and very useful and logical information.
That's a beautiful, almost kind of paradoxical statement, I think, in the sense of how we typically think of matters of the heart or information from the heart, that it is actually very logical. And I loved what you've said earlier too, in the sense of it being, it will tell you truth. It's not just here to soothe or placate us. It may cause discomfort. Really intrigued by just how you began to even explore the sense of the heart. Like I know you mentioned it came maybe even in your 50s. Yeah, what was instigated that almost, or what brought that about?
Um, I think it was having learned to meditate through going, to various courses with people, wonderful, wonderful men and women that I respected very much. And everything they taught me was about listening deeply, not just in an argument, but listening deeply to what other people were trying to say underneath what they were actually saying, trying to tune in and even ask them, when you said this, is that what you meant? And very often those inquiries, particularly in the kind of conflict work that I was and still am doing, is brings such breakthroughs, you've no idea. So, for example, if two people are in conflict and in an argument, and you're there to try to assist them, if at a certain moment you can just say, just hold on a second. When you address one of the participants, when you said X, did you mean this? And they'll say, no, I didn't mean that at all. And then you'll get some more truth of what they maybe didn't dare to say or weren't encouraged to say, and then they say it, and then you get to real information. So I learned that in conflict, I wouldn't say resolution, conflict management, or helping people manage their conflicts, and nearly always coming out with a much more harmonious or positive or inquiring attitude. So it's and that's I've been doing that since my 30s, I think. But just getting more and more engaged with the skills of the process as time has gone on. And maybe I started listening to my heart much earlier than I recall, but I do know that the experience has convinced me that that's my best resource in any kind of conflict work. My heart will sometimes inform me when someone is not to be believed, and I need to ask another question, and ask it in a gentle and straightforward enough tone that it won't be accusatory. Did you really mean X? Or is there more to that than Y? Things like that. And it's always invaluable because sometimes it's uncomfortable for people to get to their truth. But with a bit of support and encouragement, and it's obviously easier for them to do it in private, in a one-to-one. But quite often they will even do it in an argument with the blessing of the heart.
I love the sense of the heart as almost a filter of truth or a perception of truth in ways. The Was there a moment where you found yourself following the heart and you were somewhat almost incredulous that you were really living this? Do you understand what I mean? Like sometimes I think we can read things, we can think that's a beautiful idea, but that's that author's or that's that thinker's or that's that great sage's experience. Was there a moment where you were almost incredulous at the fact that you were fully committing to whatever the heart may have been suggesting?
Yes, it was at a meeting we were having maybe 30 years ago, um, with some very, very senior diplomats and military people from China meeting their opposite numbers in the UK. And it's obviously very delicate. They were not fully cleared by their authorities for being there. And so I had asked 5 meditators that I trust to sit underneath the proceedings in the hall. It was a sort of like a corridor underneath the hall where we were meeting formally. And I asked the meditators to just be completely silent, not to appear, just to hold the space for this potentially very difficult meeting. And at the break for lunch, one of the participants came to me, a very straightforward American guy, and he said, "This is a very amazing meeting, Scilla. I'm amazed at what's going on here. What's your secret?" And I said, "Well, if I tell you, you'll probably be shocked." And he said, "Well, get on and tell me." And I said, "Well, there are people, very, very highly trusted people, who don't know what's going on in this meeting, but who are sitting underneath the meeting in the not the cellar, the passageway underneath. And they are just meditating all the time for 2 days while we meet here." And his mouth went, and he said, "You're kidding." And I said, "No, that's what we do. And it's very respectful, because they can hear nothing. They are just holding the goodwill and the space for this meeting to produce understanding and listening particularly. But they have no idea what we're talking about and never will have." And he said, "Oh, like that." And I said, "Well, if you don't believe me, I can introduce you to one of them, but it will be very private. Is that all right?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "There will be no discussion of what's been discussed. It's just that you can set eyes on the person who has been supporting this meeting." And he said, "Yeah, I'd love to." So we did that very briefly, just 5 minutes. And I've done that ever since, that if there are tricky meetings between diplomats or military or combatants from opposite sides who are pretty reluctant to meet the other side, but also a bit excited, and it's all confidential, of course, the whole thing. They can deny being there. But it's amazing what has come out of these discussions. I'm not free to say what has come out, but extraordinary links and friendships between people from opposing sides.
I must say, when I heard you share some version of that story before, I don't know, it just gave me such hope, to be honest. And I think I almost felt, even as I do now, somewhat of a kind of an emotional reaction to it, in the sense of just the sheer, I don't know, possibility for humanity. I'm really intrigued. What, how did that come to you, that idea, and how did you engage with that idea prior to implementation? Like, what was your relationship almost with that idea prior to doing it?
Well, I've been lucky enough to be taught by great masters of meditation and inner work, they would call it. And I've watched the way they interact. Like, one of my teachers would be with an auditorium of maybe 200 people, and somebody would get up to ask a question. And I just noticed the way he listened to what the person from the audience was asking and how he listened. And I almost saw him absorbing the countenance of this person, not just how they looked, but what they contained, what their anguish might have been. And so there was a moment or two before he responded. And that was like gold. It kind of went like that to me, that he was listening so intently. And then when he responded, of course, it was pure truth. It was the most kind and affectionate and truthful guidance he could have given to this person. And that happened again and again and again. So, trying to answer your question, I just watched and learned from this teacher who I was and still deeply grateful to. And I've had 2 or 3 such teachers. I mean, what a blessing.
There's something that I find really beautiful, though, about somebody who is totally unaware of what's occurring, but it's still somewhat tangible for them to note it and to express that to you. I'm just wondering, do you have any thoughts just on how someone who wasn't primed to potentially notice something and maybe even being in a role or a situation where you may not think that the awareness or presence might be all that subtle? Do you have any kind of thoughts just on how clearly that was felt by somebody that, they actually met, they named it?
Um, yes, I can't recall them because they were very spontaneous and I didn't memorize them. But there was I could see it happening almost. There was almost a visible change in the person when, if I was asking a question in an interaction, they kind of went like that. They noticed something. And they might not have been able to describe it. It might have been putting them on the spot to say what's going on. That would have been too intrusive. But it's the way inner intelligence grows. And if you know this, when you meet someone who's got inner intelligence, they sometimes take a minute or two before they respond to a question, or they're emanating something which enables you to trust them. I'm sure you felt that. And from there, people can become more and more open. But the great masters, and in that I include women, who have studied this all their lives, they're very stable with it. It's always very thoughtful.
The the distinction there of, okay, there seems to be this real alertness and compassion, but yet also firmness in kind of how you're describing some of these encounters. Like, so for example, your heart may be suggesting that this person may not be saying something truthful, but then that doesn't go turn into something accusatory. It seems that there's once again like an invitation. So the way you're describing this, even this conversation or this relating, it doesn't feel it falls into some of the typical tropes of, just someone's being aggressive or confrontational. And yet it doesn't seem too soft either, that it just dissipates. Can you describe even the feeling of that kind of balance to that sense of relating and how it may differ?
Um, well, you've put your finger on it because it's about truthfulness and non-truthfulness. And if somebody says something that you recognize as not being 100% true, there are ways you can respond. And one would be to say, is that true? And they'll immediately defend. But if you ask a gentle question, So I'm really interested in what you just said. Does that mean that? And then they will be drawn out a bit to say what they really meant. And then, if you have time, you can draw it out with gentle questions, but not assumptions. That that there should not be the assumption that you suspect them of lying. Just the pure inquiry that you are making, and a delight that which you might not express, that but with your heart will communicate when they do start to be more truthful.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the significance there when you mentioned even if there's the time or the space, and perhaps maybe even even how you mentioned there could be a pause or a silence. Can you tell me when be that became more an integral part of your work?
Amazing things happen in silence, in conversation. Most of us rattle on. I certainly do, in a chatty conversation. But when there is something important being discussed, silences are invaluable. And if somebody is bottling up and their body language is slightly backing off like that, and if in that moment you can say something not soothing but sort of invitational. I'm interested in what you said about, is there anything more you'd like to add there? Or that sort of inquiry. Yeah, something like that, which would give them space to say nothing really, or to add to what they'd said.
There seems to be a beautiful subtlety to the significance of so much of what's being communicated, whether it's verbal or not. And even just with the extent of the presence of people, in the vicinity of a room, but even just what you're describing there. And I think we can feel that quite strongly sometimes if we feel something is shifted in a conversation, maybe even without words. I'm really intrigued just when you mentioned the kind of the question that you're asking yourself as you move through life of who am I? Perhaps just when maybe you first became aware that that was a question that held some weight for you.
Oh, I'm sure it was in various meditation retreats that I've attended that have been led by great, great teachers. And I can't remember, I think it was in my 30s when that question first came up for me. Who am I really? I'm very good at pretending. I like you, I'm an actor if I need to be. And us actors can get carried away with our ability to act. And it became a challenge for me to say, that's not quite good enough. I can play at being knowledgeable and wise and dignified and all those things, but who am I really? And actually, although it was a bit scary, that some of the answers I got, because my honest voice would say, well, you do tell lies quite often, don't you? And I had to admit it was true. And so I began to notice the fibs that I told, and stop myself and say, actually, sorry, that isn't quite true. May I repeat my response more truthfully? Because people love it. People love it if you admit to A, being wrong, or to being untruthful, or to being too much this or too much that. And you can say, I really want to apologize. I think I was too intrusive with what I said just now. And let me start again, or something like that. And people go, they kind of, she's not such a tiger.
But it just reminded me when I took a sabbatical to India in my early 30s, and I started keeping a tally book or tally marks of all the times that I thought I lied or told an embellishment or
Really?
exaggerated something. And what stunned me was, even with the awareness that I was keeping this tally mark, I would still in moments, particularly at the beginning, it's, I think we make this great moral act of lying or not lying, and it's quite an external facing thing as well, because it's what other people find out and we may deny. But I think what's a stunning thing to realize is just the sheer level of compassion it does to ourselves, as well as what you said there in the relationship with somebody else. But for me to just go, sorry, an example I remember of telling a friend that I couldn't make it because a work call came up, and then just saying, look, I just felt a bit ropey, and I wanted some space, and just how relieving that can be, for me and the other person.
For the other person. It is a source of joy, really, that truth has come out, and you can go, oh, that feels better. It's kind of cleared the air.
There seems to be a lovely balance between a very deep and meaningful inquiry for you, and also like some sort of glint in your eye or a wink at the world, or a liveliness with your sense of exploring this question of who am I, or engaging with the world.
Well, it's partly because I'm enjoying the conversation with you. It's a lively, and it's right up my street. This is what I love to talk about, and talk about a lot with my husband and colleagues and so on. But I do think that particularly when we're talking nuclear weapons issues, which are so deadly serious, it's really helpful if conversations over meals and so on, or sometimes afterward we invite a storyteller to come along and lighten the proceedings by making the audience laugh and so on, as long as they're good at it. Some of the issues that we've had to deal with, my colleagues and I, over the years are so terribly painful in conflict terms and the results of conflict, that you almost have to, I hadn't thought of this before, but you have to nourish your heart, because your heart hurts when it encounters the pain of another, because that's what the heart does. It can feel what another is feeling. And so quite often, if that happens, I ask myself and the person I'm speaking to, if they're willing, to just put their two, I'll show you, like that on their heart. And the heart immediately responds, because it's being taken care of and it's able to do its job. It hasn't gone like that, it's because the heart can get distressed if it's accused, or if it's under threat. The heart is in trouble. And so in order to nourish it and liberate the heart, I even if there's a tricky conversation going on in the family, I will do that and just encourage my heart, because it's so responsive and so powerful when it speaks its truth.
What a beautifully intimate gesture as well, to anyone then who knows that that's what's occurring.
Mm.
Do you know that that's actually where I'm trying to maybe connect from, or speak from, or even just afford myself a moment of compassion in something that could be a tricky situation. Can you talk to me a little bit just about the significance of, the hurt or the pain of some of those conversations when you're talking about, things like nuclear war and things of this nature, and the significance then of maintaining a nourished heart. Like, it seems like such a, I don't know, like there's a white heat almost to coming into contact with such conversations, and then also continuing to be of care to our own hearts.
That's really, really good question. And I think there's two aspects Bear in mind that I haven't done nuclear negotiations between countries or armies that had nuclear weapons for a long time. I think the last time I did one of those was in my 50s. So this is not fresh information, nor is it based on what I've learned since then. When I'm or my colleagues or the people that we're working with are dealing with great suffering, and it's often undercover because talking to nuclear decision makers, they often didn't know the full horror of what they were deciding about to enter their hearts. It was too much, that you could, by pressing a button, obliterate 100,000 people. You could do that. You had the ultimate power, or you could make that happen. So the enormity of it is terrifying. It's really too much for any human heart to cope with. So I almost wish that I had known then what I know now, to see how to support people carrying that burden. When it's happened in less traumatic situations where people have been fighting or somebody's injured somebody else or something like that, it's often a question of sensing their pain that may be buried and very, very gently appreciating the struggle that they're having, without naming them, but the ways they may have dulled the realization of the enormity of the injury they'd caused or the injury to themselves. And so it's a delicate path, and I often wish there was a lot more opportunity to follow up those discussions, take them where they needed to go, but that's not always possible. But sometimes people report back and say, that conversation we had 2 months ago, well, this has happened and that's happened and that's happened. So sometimes simply planting the seeds, and even after the conversation, if you're on really good terms with with one or other participant, to say to them, how did you feel after that? And is there anything you want to take away with it? Is there any further help we can give? And that often leads to something much deeper.
I always find in this life, and it's not in some wishful or overly optimistic way that I try to reframe something. It's more just no matter what the scenario is, when there's or the stakes, or the seriousness, or the hurt, or the pain, there often seems to be a moment of compassion or humanity within that. And even just the realization, I think, when we look at the world or the way it is right now, even if it's someone that we don't agree with, just the weight of what they're potentially carrying. And also, I'd say the pain that comes if someone has shut off access to their heart and or just limited it just because the heart may say something very truthful. Curious to know, with all that awareness, how have you noticed your relationship even with yourself alter as you've moved through life, just in terms of that compassion to your heart and then compassion to yourself, I guess?
It's so important what you're touching on, and I'm really glad you brought it up. I think my background is that my father died of a series of heart attacks. My husband had 3 heart attacks while I was with him and eventually died of one. So I became very aware of what non-attention to the heart misses. Because had I known when my father died when I was 18 or 19, and had I known how separated they were from the needs of their heart, I would have loved to be able to do something, to just, even if they would let me put my hand on their heart, and just help them feel what they're ignoring of the heart. Or, they were both apparently busy and energetic men, but there was this destruction of the heart going on underneath. And we didn't know. We didn't know that the way they were living and the life they were leading was leading to the ultimate death of their heart. And I wish I had known that. I really wish I had known that. It's been enormously helpful since I've realized what I need to do for myself and can in some instances help other people with. But it's a learning process, as you know. It just goes on. But it's so exciting and so interesting what the heart tells us. You know,
I just love the image there. And my wife is presently in Hamburg. I'm in Berlin. But when she comes back, I just love the idea of taking a moment and putting our hand on each other's hearts, or whoever is listening to whoever may be around you. I think it's just such a beautiful gesture. And just curious in terms of what you and your organization are exploring in terms of almost see it as, you know, developing the capacity of the heart, because I'm always amazed at how little love or notions of the heart are mentioned in ideas we have of what the world may need. I think we can get caught up in language like the poly crisis and we have to do this and this and that. I always find it incredible how little the heart seems to be brought up. Um, Curious, just from your perspective, what you may see as potentially possible from creating more of this awareness, engagement, and listening to.
yeah. Well, I'm stunned and greatly encouraged by the reaction that there has been to this course that I started called the Mighty Heart, because it goes into quite a lot of the issues you and I have discussed, but in a teaching format so that people learn and practice how to do it in their work or with their families or whatever it is. But it's I'm astonished at how fast it's grown in people wanting to absorb this knowledge, somewhat to their surprise sometimes. And I think some of them wouldn't tell their employers that that was what they were doing. But I feel we're entering into an age, a huge change. I don't know what astrologers would say. I have no idea, but something is changing in our world. And I do believe it's having the effect of people needing to be much more aware of their bodily health, but particularly the health of their organs like their heart, in terms of how they deal with their children, how they deal with death, how they deal with everything that's difficult. And so it's a time for amazing growth in human awareness. And I do believe that the ways in which women's wisdom is being able to announce or to come forth more. We're working with a lot of women in countries in conflict, and they're doing such a good job. And I think it's because of they're a bit closer to childbirth, to death, to feelings, and willing to talk that language. And that means they're having a great deal more success than people who don't. So I do believe that we're at an age in humanity that a massive change is possible if we choose to go that way.
There's something that I feel this quite strongly too. I sense that there's it's not to not look at the horror, and obviously with lots of the work that you focus on, you're not looking away from the reality of or what's also present. But I still sense this huge swell of possibility, because I've sense of how unattuned we've been to the heart and how we've almost learned to dismiss it or which is always kind of a ridiculous contradiction there in that, you know, so much of our ways of seeing the world only through our mind dismiss so much and don't acknowledge things and make up stories to avoid what you've clearly said is the truth of the heart. And, you know, the heart won't say it in the same way the mind will, but it will serve you the truth. And that isn't always easy. So I'm just really intrigued to ask you the question of what is a good life for you?
Well, it's built on honesty. I haven't always in my life been very good at honesty, but I'm getting better. It's a good life is being able to sit sit in my body and let my body tell me what's going on, particularly in my heart. So a good life is finding time, not just, you know, for one sacred half hour, but as often as possible during the day to what's going on? You know, what's missing here? What could I contribute, if anything? So having that and in a way being not as busy as I used to be. I used to be frenetically busy all day and think that was very clever too. I thought it was so clever to be busy every day, all day. And oh, I'm so busy, you know. And it's actually an absolute joy now to have time and space, which I could have had probably all my life if I'd made the space. But it's just the good life now is having the time to do the kind of things we've been talking about, and wherever possible to talk about them with other people who are interested, because a lot of people are interested now, and it's a joy to do my best to explain what I know and listen to what they know. And the other thing that's really important, which I've always been not very good at, is listening, being a listener myself. Because what I've learned is if I really listen and take my time, I can ask a question that is not intrusive, but which brings tears or admissions or which I really hadn't expected. And so being able to enter that intimacy with people who I sometimes barely know is a great privilege.
Scilla, I think so much of what you've spoken comes with a beautiful presence of not only the words, but of a lived or embodied experience of what you're pointing to. So it's been a total delight to speak with you today. And thank you so much for joining us on the What is a Good Life podcast.
Mark, thank you, because the questions that you've asked are an absolute joy to me. And I don't think I've enjoyed an interview so much ever. It's been a joy. Thank you.